The Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was a dark night of August 4th, 1964. The seas were rough and the USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy were sailing through the Gulf of Tonkin when their radar operators began seeing blips. Sonar technicians reported torpedoes in the water. Just to remind you, that was during Vietnam War, and just 2 days ago, there was a skirmish between the American and North Vietnamese there. So the Americans thought they were attacked again, and for hours their 2 destroyers fired wildly into the darkness at the enemy. The next morning, President Lyndon Johnson was on television telling the American people that North Vietnam had launched an unprovoked attack on United States naval vessels in international waters. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara stood before cameras with absolute certainty. The attack was real, he said. America had been assaulted. But that's not true. The Maddox had not been innocently patrolling international waters. The ship had been supporting covert South Vietnamese commando raids against North Vietnamese coastal installations under a classified program called Plan 34A. But more importantly, the government did not mention that no attack had actually occurred on August 4th. The radar ghosts were weather anomalies. The sonar contacts were the ship's own propellers. A Navy pilot who flew overhead that night said he saw nothing but American ships firing at empty ocean. Regardless, within 72 hours, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting the president authority to escalate military involvement in Vietnam without formally declaring a war. Skepticism existed almost immediately within intelligence circles, but those doubts were buried. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, revealed that senior officials had their doubts about whether the second attack ever happened. But definitive proof did not come until 2005, when the National Security Agency declassified signals intelligence confirming what critics had suspected for decades. The attack of August 4th, 1964, never occurred. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's 2002, and senior officials in the Bush administration are making the case for war against Iraq's Saddam Hussein. And they're absolutely certain Saddam Hussein has active stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons. He's rebuilding his nuclear program. Secretary of State Colin Powell goes to the United Nations with a vial and says, "The threat is real." But what is the truth? Iraq had destroyed its WMD stockpiles back in the 1990s. The U.S. cherry-picked the intelligence used to justify the invasion, like using sources from unreliable defectors, like a guy literally codenamed Curveball. They suppressed dissenting analysis from the State Department and Energy Department, too. They constantly repeated the same story to the media, the same talking points over and over, until they felt like established fact. In March 2003, the invasion began. The Iraq Survey Group went all over the country looking for weapons, but they found nothing. The 2004 Dulfer report made it official. The weapons didn't exist. More than 4,400 American troops died in that war. Estimates of Iraqi deaths range from 150,000 to over 1 million, all based on intelligence that was wrong or deliberately twisted. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service began recruiting 400 African American men for what officials described as a treatment program for bad blood. These men are poor sharecroppers. They have almost no access to health care. So the promise of free treatment, hot meals, and burial insurance? It sounds like a blessing. What the government doesn't tell them is that they're actually subjects in an experiment, an observation study. The doctors want to watch what happens when syphilis goes untreated in the human body. The men are never told they have syphilis. They're never offered treatment. And when penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, the Public Health Service actively blocks them from getting it. The doctors want autopsy data. So for 40 years, government physicians watch these men as the disease destroys their bodies. Blindness, insanity, death, and the whole time the men think they're being treated. Local draft boards are told not to call up study participants during World War II, so the experiment can keep going. When some men try to get treatment elsewhere, PHS officials step in to block them. This thing ran through 4 decades. And the most disturbing part is, it wasn't even a secret in medical circles. Researchers published more than a dozen papers about their findings. Nobody in the profession raised an alarm. Then in 1972, a public health service employee named Peter Buxton, who'd been trying to stop this internally for years, finally leaks the story to a reporter. The Washington Star runs it on July 25th. Public reaction is immediate. The study gets shut down within months. By that point, at least 128 men had died directly from syphilis or its complications. 40 wives had been infected. 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. In 1997, President Clinton formally apologized, but the damage at that point was permanent. Operation Ajax, or 1953 Iranian coup. To the outside world, it looks like the Iranian people have risen up against their Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. He's a democratically elected leader with one big mistake. He nationalized his country's oil industry. Western newspapers report a popular revolution, a triumph of the Iranian masses against a leader drifting toward communism. The Shah returns from brief exile, Democracy has spoken, except none of it is true. The whole revolution was manufactured in Washington and London. The CIA and British intelligence ran the entire operation under the code name Ajax. Here's how it worked. CIA agents spent months bribing politicians, paying journalists to plant fake stories, and hiring thugs to stage violent protests. On the day of the coup, agency-funded mobs rampaged through Tehran, creating the illusion of mass uprising, while military officers on the CIA payroll seized key installations. So what was Mossadegh's actual crime? He was a nationalist who thought Iranian oil should benefit Iranians. The British had controlled Iranian petroleum through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company for decades. They paid Iran almost nothing while extracting massive wealth. When Mossadegh nationalized the industry, Britain organized an international boycott, then asked America for help removing him. The Eisenhower administration said yes, and it happened. The Shah ruled Iran for the next 26 years as an authoritarian monarch, and in 1979, it's his turn to be overthrown. All can be traced back to the coup in 1953. The agency didn't officially admit its role until 2013, 60 years after the fact. The sugar industry cover-up. In 1967, the New England Journal of Medicine publishes a review of the science on diet and heart disease. The conclusion is clear. Saturated fat and cholesterol are the villains. Sugar? Just empty calories. Basically harmless. That review shaped American nutrition policy for the next 50 years. The truth behind is, the Sugar Research Foundation had paid the equivalent of $50,000 to the Harvard scientists who wrote it. Internal documents uncovered decades later showed the sugar industry commissioned that review specifically to shift blame away from sugar and onto fat. They handpicked which studies got included. Research linking sugar to heart disease? Excluded. And the scientists never said anything about the funding. This wasn't a one-time thing, by the way. Throughout the 1960s, the sugar industry systematically funded research designed to clear their product while attacking competitors. A British scientist named John Yudkin published findings linking sugar to heart disease. His reputation then was destroyed. His work was forgotten for decades. The consequences were catastrophic. Based on the fat-focused dietary guidelines, Americans were told to cut fat. Food manufacturers removed fat from products and replaced it with sugar to keep the taste. Low-fat cookies, low-fat yogurt, low-fat everything. All of it is loaded with added sugars. And, to no one's surprise, the obesity and diabetes rates started climbing. The dark truth wasn't discovered until 2016, when researchers at UC San Francisco found them in archived papers. By then, generations of Americans had developed chronic diseases while following dietary advice that was bought and paid for. The Nayirah Testimony. On October 10, 1990, the Congressional Human Rights Caucus convenes to hear testimony about Iraqi atrocities in Kuwait. A 15-year-old girl takes the stand. She's identified only as Nayirah. Her voice trembles as she describes what she saw. Iraqi soldiers entered a hospital in Kuwait City. They pulled premature babies out of incubators, left them on the cold floor to die. It's the most powerful testimony in the entire build-up to the Gulf War. President George H.W. Bush cites the incubator story at least 10 times over the next few weeks. Senators invoke it during the debate over authorizing military force. Amnesty International initially repeats the claim. The Senate vote to authorize war passes by just 5 votes. But here's what they didn't know. Nayirah was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. Her testimony had been organized and coached by Hill & Knowlton, one of the biggest PR firms in the world. They'd been paid more than $10 million by citizens for a free Kuwait, which was basically a front group funded by the Kuwaiti government. The firm had run focus groups to figure out which atrocity stories would work best on American audiences. Babies torn from incubators tested extremely well. After the war, investigators went looking for evidence. Human Rights Watch couldn't find any witnesses. Doctors who worked in Kuwaiti hospitals said it never happened. In 1992, journalist John MacArthur revealed Nayirah's real identity in the New York Times, long after American already bombs the shit out of Iraqis. The Tobacco Conspiracy. On April 14, 1994, 7 CEOs of America's biggest tobacco companies stand before a congressional subcommittee. They raise their right hands. They swear to tell the truth. Then they're asked a simple question. Is nicotine addictive? One by one, they say no. The CEO of Philip Morris says he believes nicotine is not addictive. The CEO of R.J. Reynolds agrees. So do the heads of Lorillard, Liggett, Brown and Williamson, American Tobacco, and U.S. Tobacco. Yes, all 7 men deny what their own scientists had known for decades. Internal documents later revealed that tobacco companies had figured out nicotine was addictive back in the 1950s. They knew cigarettes caused cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and yet they lied. The Tobacco Industry Research Committee funded studies designed to muddy the scientific consensus. Ads featured doctors endorsing cigarettes. Industry lawyers crafted careful language to avoid legal liability while continuing to deceive the public. The playbook was simple. As long as there appeared to be a scientific controversy, regulation could be delayed, lawsuits could be defended. The strategy worked for half a century, causing millions to die. When state attorneys general finally forced the release of internal documents in the 1990s, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Tobacco companies hadn't just lied about their product. They had systematically suppressed research, corrupted science, and lied to the public, while selling something they knew was deadly. The 1998 Master Settlement Agreement required the industry to pay over $200 billion, but no executive went to prison. Japanese internment. In 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066. It authorizes the military to exclude any persons from designated areas. The order doesn't mention Japanese Americans by name, but everyone knows who it's targeting. Within months, more than 120,000 people of Japanese descent are forced from their homes on the West Coast. They're imprisoned in remote camps with barbed wire and armed guards. The government calls it military necessity because Japanese Americans pose a threat of espionage and sabotage, officials claim, and the West Coast is vulnerable. There's no time to figure out who's loyal and who isn't, and that mass imprisonment is the only option. It was a lie, though. The FBI had already investigated the Japanese American community, but they found no evidence of organized disloyalty. The vast majority of Japanese Americans were loyal, and mass incarceration was unnecessary. The military buried those findings. When legal challenges reached the Supreme Court, government lawyers didn't mention the intelligence assessments. In Korematsu versus United States, the court upheld internment based on false claims of military necessity. So what were the real reasons? Racism, war hysteria, and greed. White farmers in California had resented Japanese-American agricultural success for years. The war gave them a chance to eliminate the competition. Japanese-American families lost everything. 41 years later, a congressional commission concluded the internment wasn't justified by military necessity. And 5 years later, President Reagan signed legislation apologizing and paying $20,000 to each surviving internee. The Pat Tillman Cover-Up. Pat Tillman walked away from a $3.4 million contract with the Arizona Cardinals to enlist in the Army after the September attack. He became the face of post-attack patriotism, a pro athlete who gave up fame and fortune to serve. When he was killed in Afghanistan on April 22, 2004, the military had a ready-made hero and a story to tell. According to initial reports, Tillman died charging up a hill toward enemy positions. He was awarded the Silver Star posthumously. His memorial was nationally televised, and his death became a recruiting tool. The story was completely made up. Within hours of Tillman's death, investigators knew what really happened. He was killed by friendly fire. Members of his own platoon responding to an ambush in a narrow canyon mistook his position for the enemy and opened fire. Tillman was hit 3 times in the forehead from about 10 meters away. The Army didn't tell his family. Instead, they burned his uniform and body armor, which would have shown the close range of the shots. His diary was destroyed. Witness statements were changed. For 5 weeks, the Tillmans were allowed to believe their son died fighting the Taliban. They only learned what really happened after they started asking questions the Army couldn't dodge. Investigations revealed the cover-up went up the chain of command, possibly to the top of the Pentagon. No general faced serious punishment, by the way. And Tillman, who had privately opposed the Iraq War, who planned to meet with Noam Chomsky after his deployment, got reduced to a recruiting poster. The My Lai Massacre. On March 16, 1968, soldiers of Charlie Company enter a village in Quang Ngai Province, marked on American maps as My Lai 4. According to official accounts, they engage a Viet Cong battalion, kill 128 enemy fighters, and capture 3 weapons. The report was a lie. There was no battle at My Lai, and there were no Viet Cong fighters, just villagers, mostly women, children, elderly men doing their daily things when American soldiers walked in. Over the next 4 hours, Charlie Company murdered between 347 and 504 unarmed civilians. They raped, then killed women, and shot children as they ran. Families were herded into drainage ditches and executed with automatic weapons. The killing only stopped when a helicopter pilot named Hugh Thompson landed his aircraft between the soldiers and a group of survivors. He ordered his door gunner to fire on any American who kept shooting. The chain of command buried the whole thing. Officers filed false reports. When rumors reached division headquarters, quick investigations concluded civilian casualties were limited and unavoidable. For over a year, My Lai stayed hidden until a soldier named Ron Riddenhauer, who'd heard accounts from participants, started writing letters to congressmen, senators, the Pentagon, demanding an investigation. Journalist Seymour Hersh got the story and published it in November 1969. Then, the photographs of the crime came out. America saw what its soldiers had done. Lieutenant William Calley, the platoon leader who personally killed dozens of villagers, was the only one convicted. He served 3.5 years of house arrest. The rest, who covered it up, no consequences.